Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. And Daniel, good to see you this week again.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
Good. Doing well. And this is a shorter week for a lot of people.
Yeah.
But we're going to work hard to try to have a program up every single day.
That's right. We never sleep.
Because we don't want to miss Thanksgiving, but we should have a Thanksgiving message up of sorts. And
that's right.
Maybe tell everybody why we're so thankful in spite of all the problems that we talk about. At least we still are allowed to talk about them. And that we don't know how long that is going to last. Anyway, but today we want to talk about something because can you believe it that we have found information that may be false and that our government actually dropped missiles, like 100 of them, because of this false information? This has to do with the gas, remember? Yeah, you remember. But the old accusation that Assad's poisoning and gassing his own people, had to have had to have an enemy, had to have a Hitler to fight, and people bought into this. There was not too much said, but then Trump, maybe his heart wasn't in it, but the pressure was so great he had to launch some missiles. Didn't blow up a city or anything like that, but it cost a few dollars, and it just made no sense. And we did a program back then. We suggested, do we know for sure that's doing this? And there was every reason to believe it was a false flag. It was another reason just to pursue, Obama's war on Assad. Assad has to go, and this was 2018, and he was still there. Matter of fact, I understand he still's there.
Yeah.
So they said, this will do it. This will galvanize everybody, and we're going to get that guy. So. But our program back then suggested the whole false flag, and then there was a report from the United Nations, and they sort of went along with, he was gassing his own people. But then there were a few people that were truly in the category of whistleblowers involved in this, and understand this is a UN organization, and these individuals came up and found out that it indeed was lying and changing and forging, and that seems to go on quite frequently. If you need the officials to agree, just forge the papers. Maybe you can even get an illegal warrant by forging papers and lying. But anyway, in a way, this is good news that this information came out, and we're thankful that there still are some people out there looking for the truth. But it does have ramification. The big question is, could this at all ever participate in our government, our people, changing their attitude about our foreign policy? That's what I'm hopeful for and will continue to work for.
Yeah, that's key. And this was back in April of 2018 that this happened, and we did our show right afterward. I think it was just a few days after the so-called attack. The President Trump was determined that this is what happened, this is who did it, and we're going to hit him back. And so he fired 100 Tomahawk missiles. At the time, we did a little math and thought it may have cost as much as $1 billion, because when you move these ships around, these carrier groups around, you fire these missiles, it costs a couple of bucks to do it. So what has happened now is it happened in April of 2018. The redacted report came out in July of 2019 for the Organization for the Prevention of Chemical Weapons. That's the UN body that went in and investigated the attack. They sent a team of investigators, including ballistics people, chemical people, all sorts of things. They went in, they did a thorough investigation. And when the report came out in July, a group of the inspectors that were involved said, this isn't at all what we concluded. This report has been doctored. And so they went within the system. They wrote some letters to their superiors. They wrote some letters trying to figure out what happened. Why is the final report not at all what we concluded? And they didn't get anywhere. And so finally, the email of one of the whistleblowers was leaked. And Peter Hitchens at the Daily Mail did a great piece yesterday, I think it was, on it. But there have been other pieces on this. Of course, most of the mainstream media won't touch it with a 10-foot pole. But it's just really fascinating. It goes with what we were thinking at the time. It doesn't make any sense. Assad's about to win here. Why would he just say, I'm going to gas some people for fun? I'll throw a couple of things out, and then I'll come back with a couple. But here's one of the main ones. The report said that, quote, various chlorinated organic chemicals were found on the scene. but they took out the part where they talked about the concentration. And this is what the whistleblower said. No, that the levels were parts per billion, 2 parts per billion, which is something you'd probably find in your house, in my house, anyone who cleans with chlorine. It wasn't a massive gas. And there's more we'll get into, but step by step by step, someone came in with a heavy hand and scrubbed all of the evidence that would exonerate Assad from the attack.
Well, this is interesting. It's a UN organization. It's not understood to be under our total control. But in many ways, it was in the interest of our policies, if you're looking at our policy being designed by the deep state. So they must have had a motivation, and I think that's still something that, to fully understand it, you have to realize, how do they do it? You know, and who gets the pressure and able and the enthusiasm for this? I just can't believe that our hands were clean. Our hands weren't clean because they used that enough to launch the missiles.
Yeah.
And this is from a president who doesn't brag about, starting the next war. Matter of fact, he talks tough, but his actions have generally been trying to avoid, military conflict, although his substitute isn't all that great either, but at least he does. But so there's somebody in there that is motivated and they're able to get control of it. But since we put money into all of these organizations, you have to assume that we have our people there that can influence these types of investigations.
Well, the U.S., the U.K., and the EU provide the vast majority of the financing and the funding for the OPCW. All 3 of those entities were solidly behind the Syrian rebels, backing them, training them, arming them. They were all dedicated to having the conclusion that Assad did it. And so that says a lot. And in fact, there's a great report from Jonathan Steele, who's an award-winning British journalist, and he pointed out something fascinating. There's a guy called Bob Fairweather. No one's ever heard of him. It always happens this way. He's a British diplomat. He was the top guy at the OPCW for this report. He was the guy in charge. Listen to this. This is what happened. On July 4th, there was another intervention. Fairweather, the chef de cabinet, the chief of cabinet, invited, this is part of the whistleblowers talking, invited several members of the drafting team, that's the ones writing the report, to his office. There they found 3 U.S. officials who were cursorily introduced without making clear which U.S. agencies they represented. The Americans told them emphatically that the Syrian regime had conducted a gas attack and that the 2 cylinders found on the roof and the upper floor of the building contained 170 kilograms of chlorine. The inspectors left the office feeling that the invitation from the Americans to address them was unacceptable pressure and a violation of their principles of impartiality. 2 days later, the report was released. And that morning, this is the whistleblower, a senior colleague told us, first floor, that means the management says that for the OPCW's credibility, we have to have a smoking gun. And that's when they locked onto those canisters. It was U.S. pressure from unnamed agencies that did it.
So if they're capable of lying under these circumstances, I guess it's not a giant leap to assume that they, quite possibly the same group of people, would lie about impeachments and different things in this country, because they're really the same group of people wanting to run roughshod over the people. So and certainly that has been building. I often think about the Samuel Johnson quote that patriotism is the last refuge for a scoundrel.
Yeah.
And I keep thinking, when I listen to these hearings and this type of operation, people telling lies, that they always, when they really want to put the Republicans on a guilt trip, Pelosi and others will say, it's our constitutional duty to do this, and that's, they hide behind the Constitution. And whether it's a Republican or a Democrat hiding behind the Constitution in order to justify this just is totally bewildering when you think of what they support. I think 90% of what they do in Washington doesn't doesn't support the Constitution. You know, whether it's the welfare warfare state, whether it's the Federal Reserve System, whether it's the foreign policy, whether it's our privacy that they're concerned about, they don't defend any of that. And then for them to get up there highfalutin debate and say, you know, you people, and they look to the American people and say, we do this. We don't like to have to do this. We don't want to do this, but it is our constitutional responsibility to bring Trump down because we hate his guts. Oh, no, I misspoke on that. No, we don't hate him.
You sound like Schiff. Exactly.
Oh, my.
But you're right to touch the deep state. You know, this is what we're seeing it in the Trump thing. It's very clear. And that makes you wonder when you talk about who's guilty. Where does it go? Who did it? We spend, what, $80-some billion a year at least on our intelligence community. Did they know? How much did they know that this was not a gas attack? Did Trump know? My suspicion now is that they kept him in the dark. We were pretty ticked off at him after he launched those. But it is a big question. But here's a couple of the other facts that the whistleblower pointed out. This is as digested by Peter Hitchens, that the final report, which was doctored and slashed, did not include. The final report was slashed and censored so severely it misrepresented the facts. It hid the fact that traces of chlorine found at the site were merely tiny trace elements, parts per billion, could have been found in any household bleach. The final report contained major deviations from the original report submitted by impartial experts so that it had, quote, morphed into something quite different. And here's another important one. It suppressed a total mismatch between the symptoms allegedly displayed by the victims at the scene and the effects of the chemicals which were actually found. The symptoms seen on the harrowing videos, remember they were shot by the white helmets, shown at the time of the incident simply did not match the symptoms that would have been caused by any of the material found on the site. This is the white helmets filming a fake attack.
You didn't happen to look and check and see how the New York Times has handled this release of
Front
it?
page.
Yeah, no. If they barely mention it, there's no way they'd have any self-interest in it because it would expose them for them being a participant in this. You know, there's a lot more we could talk about on this, but I wanted to mention a few other things because it has to do with Syria. And I remember in some of the wars going on in the Middle East, the left would chant, it's all about oil. And I keep thinking it's about more than that. It's about our empire and other things, and military-industrial complex. But it is a lot to do about oil. Now, we praised Trump when he said, I'm coming home. We don't need to be in Syria. And it was Obama's war, and there's no purpose for being there. So he says, we're coming home. And hysteria broke out.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, all those anti-war Democrats, the pro-war Democrats, which means most of the Democrats,
yeah.
they went nuts, as did all the media. And they were complaining about the fact that he might be soft on it. But Trump really probably, we don't know because we can't read his mind, whether he never had any intention on leaving or whether he would like to have left and he had to compensate by staying behind and send more troops in.
Yeah.
So he declared that the oil belonged to the United States. That's essentially what he said.
Yeah,
it's our oil, and we have to protect it. So he sends more people in there to protect it. Now, the headline I want to mention, it was on Zero Hedge. It just is really the irony and the stupidity of the kind of foreign policy we have in us doing these crazy things. This headline says, U.S. forces attack boats caught smuggling oil to the Syrian government. I mean, the oil from eastern Syria, they're getting it in there and they're delivering it to the government in western Syria, and this is the crime of the century. And it's just, if you think logically or if you think in a non-military sense that we settle everything by military and that we should have intervention, this just would drive a person nuts. But it should be said because of the stupidity, how one stupid act leads to other stupid acts, and that's what I see that as.
Yeah, and that just shows the lie that, well, we're there to protect it from ISIS getting a hold of it. No, because as we said at the time, we're there to keep it from Assad's hands. The funny thing is, I wouldn't be surprised if it wasn't the SDF, the Kurds, who are the ones doing the smuggling, because that's what they've done all along. They'll just, jack the price up a little bit and sell it back to Syria.
Yeah, sort of, or just a plain old red flag to give a place where Trump can hide behind. There was another news item too, and this was pretty good. New poll shows Americans favor non-intervention.
Nice.
And the statistics were detailed, but it was always an improvement. It was, if you were 50 or so, those old people, they're more, you're not 50.
I wish.
No, the old people are more warmongering, patriotic. But the younger people, they have a lot of problems, but maybe they'll be anti-war,
Yeah.
So the younger people say we shouldn't be doing all these things. So I think that is a very good move for that. At the same time, the articles are appearing now that you have to really laugh about is that why are the Democrats so pro-war? They're more pro-war than the Republicans, and but they go back and forth because the Democrats have become so aggressive and blame Russia on everything. Now you're hearing a few Republicans and are saying, well, maybe we shouldn't be that strong. But of all the Democrats, I guess Tulsi's about the only one that makes any sense whatsoever on foreign policy.
I was going to say that poll suggests why people are attracted to Tulsi and Bernie, who's considered anti-war even though he's not a purist, and even Trump, who ran as an anti-war candidate. So there's the lesson for you. And you were talking about this, that your opposition to the UN over the years has been kind of interesting to watch, because you started out as being opposed to the UN as the organization that pushes us around and tells us what to do. And that to a degree is still the case. But it's sort of evolved now to your concern about it is that it's an organization manipulated by the deep state and the neocons to force them to accept and give a fig leaf over terrible policies. And I think that's the case here, really, to conclude about the OPCW report. Here are these unnamed Americans coming in saying, here's what you're going to conclude. The OPCW has a history of this manipulation, and I think some of our astute viewers will remember this. Back in 2002, in the run-up to the Iraq War, then Director Jose Bustani, who was a Brazilian, he wanted to send OPCW inspectors into Iraq to look for WMDs before the war. And guess who came down on him like a ton of bricks? John Bolton. And this is widely reported. He busted in and he said to Bustani, the OPCW director, you've got 24 hours to vacate your post. He also said, we know where your kids live. You've got 2 sons in New York. Taken as a direct threat. So this is the history of the U.S. manipulating these organizations.
One other thing in that poll that I thought was good, there was a recognition, more of the young people than the older people, is that we use the term exceptional, erroneously. That I think every American wants to be an exceptional nation and have a good policy, but the words have been so distorted. Exceptionalism is meant to be aggressively willing to expand our empire, because we are so great and we have this moral obligation put on our head, on our shoulders, and we have to carry the burden in order to make the world safe for democracy, this sort of thing. But that attitude is changing. The non-intervention is less exciting, but this is working right into it, and we see all these problems, and there was a list just put out on how many uprisings are occurring.
Yeah.
And I still am convinced that there's various factors that contribute to this, but one is that the system is running out of steam, financially, and the only thing holding it together is an illusion that the dollar can bail out everybody. Yeah. And 2 things are happening. The dollar can't bail out everybody on foreign policy. And the second thing is we're going to antagonize enough people that they're going to welcome the fall of the empire. Yeah. And of course, the best thing for us is to philosophically give up on the empire and promote something exceptional, and that is why individual liberty is so important.
Exactly. Well, closing out on this scandal that we started talking about, I wanted to look at who are the good guys and the bad guys. And I didn't have time to make a full list, but the list would probably take the whole show. But here's the good guy, Robert Fisk, journalist for The Independent, spent a ton of time in the Middle East. He went over there right after the attack, and he talked to people on the ground. He wasn't bloviating on MSNBC or Fox, talking to people on the ground. He said, there's no attack. No one's even talking about an attack. Nobody even knows what we're talking about. He even went to the hospital. Nobody knows what we're talking about. He was called a kook, an Assad apologist, a bad guy, horrible. Turns out he was right. Bad guy, Nikki Haley. Remember her performance at the UN, holding up all these pictures of the little kids suffocated and everything? My question is, how much did she know when she went down there and do it? Was she in on this whole thing? I would not be surprised if she was. Final good guy, Ron Paul, because I don't want to embarrass you, but when it happened, that's the first thing you said. This looks like a false flag to me. Why would he do this? It makes no sense. Of course, you were criticized too. But here's a chance to read a great new book from a good guy. This is America's Exceptional Bankruptcy, and it goes into the moral bankruptcy that leads us to do things like this. And when I say us, I mean Washington, not us. It leads Washington to do things like this, to waste $1 billion on 100 Tomahawks flown into Syria doing nothing. So that's the problem. You can get this book only by supporting the Ron Paul Liberty Report and the Ron Paul Institute. I'll have some details in the description of the show, but help us keep the show on the air for $50 or more. We'll send you a copy of this as our thank you. For $100 or more, Dr. Paul will sign it. This is only good. This is a limited time offer. But wait, there's more. A limited time offer through the first week of December. So act now, get Dr. Paul's great new booklet, help support the show, help us get the word out, help us report on things like this that the deep state doesn't want you to know.
Very good. Thank you. I still believe that our involvement is mainly to change the perception of what exceptional means, and that why we should be involved worldwide, why we are not isolationists. We're voluntarists. We want to trade and talk and deal with people in a voluntary fashion, same way you do in your own little neighborhood. If somebody doesn't want to come over and play cards with you, you just ignore them, and everything has to be voluntary. And why that has become a bad word it's strange. Only way I can explain it is some individuals are born with this authoritarian instinct that everybody else is stupid, incapable of taking care of themselves, and they are the exceptional people, and they will take care of everybody, and you have to sacrifice a little bit of liberty. But what's coming on right now is the recognition that it doesn't work. Young people are starting to realize that the system doesn't work. There's too much war and too much debt. They know about debt. They have to understand how it happened and why it happened and how the Federal Reserve works into this. So we're at a place where education should get easier for us. The challenge is they're working very hard to silence what anybody wants to do when they're starting to talk about liberty and non-intervention and getting rid of the empire, because the deep state wants the empire. They run the empire, and they want to keep it that way. And the poorer the world gets because of this worldwide bankruptcy, the more authoritarian they're going to get. In a way, it's sort of happening right now. The system we've had for the last 100 years has been imperfect. It was being developed by the insiders through the Federal Reserve System and doing the welfare warfare state. But now it's going to be a lot easier to point out because it's failing, and they're going to have to look and see how they do it. And yet people get very bullheaded, and there's a lot of force and power that people use. I understand you'd think by now Venezuela would get rid of their inflation rate, and Zimbabwe, they still have high inflation. They haven't sat down to think, well, maybe there's a reason for this. And it's sort of the way we do on our foreign policy. We never ask why our foreign policy efforts fail when we have all the money and tanks and weaponry and all that we do. We should ask the right questions if we expect to get the right answers. They are available, and that's where I'm optimistic. They're being spread by many, many organizations, and we're just one small little channel, but we do reach more people than we realize, and we get good messages back. So everybody has that responsibility, whether you think you're talking to 1, 10, 20, or 50. But I meet a lot of people who have gotten interested in this over the last 10 or 15 years, and they're reaching thousands of people. and nobody knows how many people they have reached. And that means they're out there, they're studying and they're learning, and they realize that the answers cannot be found in conventional Republican Democrat politics. So the time is coming for a change, and there's going to be a crisis that's going to hit, and we're going to give the opportunity, but keep fighting for the rights of all individuals and for liberty, and believe me, we can come up and make this world a better place to live. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Come back soon.